to introduce Dr. Larry Rosenthal, an assistant adjunct professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. In addition to his professorship, he is the executive director of the Berkeley program in housing and urban policy. He is co-editor of Risking Housing and Home, Disasters, Cities, and Public Policy, a collection of symposium papers commemorating the centennial of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire. Earlier, he co-authored Our Town, Race, Housing, and the Soul of Suburbia, an award-winning social, legal, and policy narrative on the historic Mount Laurel housing rights case in New Jersey. Dr. Rosenthal's research has addressed land use and regulatory barriers, rental subsidy, housing affordability, effects of prevailing wage legislation on low-income housing development, effects of construction defect litigation on the supply of condos and attached housing, and the efficacy of various methodologies in estimating the homeless population. Recently, he served as managing editor for a special issue on the mortgage meltdown, published in the BE Journal of Economic Analysis and Policy. Originally trained as an attorney, Dr. Rosenthal served as law clerk to the late Justice Marcus M. Kaufman at the Supreme Court of California, and was Governor George Deukmejian's appointee to California's Dispute Resolution Advisory Council. He later was an associate at the San Francisco law firm of Hanson Bridget, and acted as a statistical consultant to the United States Court of the Northern District of California in its implementation of the Civil Justice Reform Act. He has served as a consultant to a variety of public and nonprofit bodies regarding housing development and related topics. Dr. Rosenthal holds doctoral and master's degrees in public policy from the UC Berkeley, a law degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and an A.B. from Oberlin College. Here to speak to us about the housing policies beyond 2012, please welcome Dr. Larry Rosenthal.
Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? I promise there won't be an exam. The bigger question is, has the coffee kicked in yet? Well, this is an interesting time to gather. It's wonderful to be with you and to learn more about NACCED and the work at the county level. We are quite focused in Berkeley on the relationships between local government and the sources of the resources that make local government available to do the work in the neighborhood level. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about an election that's coming up. You might have heard about it. The idea is, and this is the Berkeley Guy's uninvited subtitle, Housing Policy 2012, the presidential debate bound not to happen. The disadvantage or advantage of being headline news, of course, of the housing markets and their instability has suddenly given us, the people in this room, unforeseen star power like we've never seen in our lives before. We used to do our work in the back offices and figure out things relating to subsidy and assistance for the disadvantaged and recovery of neighborhoods and a variety of other topics, redevelopment. But suddenly we've been thrust onto the national marquee. I mean, you're all celebrities now, right? You've been feeling that? You've probably been hiding under the desk. But what do we do with all this star power? Do we convert it into something that's going to guarantee that, in fact, our issues, the topics that we work on, are going to be crucial in this campaign? The problem is that neither the political parties kind of has policy prescriptions that they deem to be political winners in this territory. So they're hiding under the table too. Many say that the bottom in housing prices is behind us, and we've been worried for many years about the possibility of a double dip, but as Sean mentioned, there's been slight upticks, and this is a graph from Realty Track that shows stable, slightly improving prices, both of the average of all home sales and even just foreclosures. And I think that number is very interesting, that the price of foreclosures would be going up slightly, meaning there might be some competition within that market, or that in certain places that the backlog is starting to wear down a little bit. But the reality, if you look at Reality Track, which I often call Realty Track, is that the proportion of homes still in mortgage trouble is entirely too high in a lot of areas. The darkest images on this map show that 1 in 298, 1 in 300 about housing units is in delinquency or serious foreclosure, and that denominator is all housing units. It's not the number of mortgages. In these worst places, the number of mortgages that are in trouble is much higher. So conditions remain dire in a number of places. 14% of all mortgages here in Florida are in foreclosure, which is a ghastly number when you start to think about it. Nearly 1 in 6 mortgages out there being in foreclosure. It's just a horrendous condition. Nevada, likewise, 6% of all mortgages are in foreclosure, 6% are seriously delinquent. Nationally, 3 million households are in foreclosure or seriously delinquent. Some recovery, huh? So where are we? My plan for the remarks today, Photoshop is a wonderful thing. They're going to be friends. I know they're going to be friendly after this. So, Obamany. Have you never heard that word before? Obamany. A rough comparison of Obama's record and Romney's positions is the first thing that we'll try to complete. Then, moving towards closing, I want to talk a little bit about what I see as the coming convergence and consensus. For us, we're thinking about Washington and practice across the country showing signs of depolarization, finding agreement, finding convergence and consensus. What does that look like going forward? And you may hear a little Berkeley policy prescription as well. And then some concluding remarks on the question, what if? What if the topics that we care so deeply about, so passionately about in this room, actually mattered in the election? So first, a disclaimer. Rosenthal and Berkeley has nothing on you. NACCED members have lived Obama's housing and community development policies. I can't tell you anything you don't already know. My assessment, and I would love to hear your take on it, on balance, we've seen in the last 4 years a blend of drastic measures, of genuine vision and creativity, and a number of places where it's just steady as she goes, given the constraints. But politically, in how the White House will characterize its work in the field, it's the recession, stupid. Apologies to James Carville. Meaning, unless they can point to accomplishments that relieved the trouble, why would they say anything about them if there's something to talk about elsewhere in the foreign policy or domestic policy world? It's not a set of strong accomplishments. It's not a steady 3% or greater GDP growth rate. The president has a lot of fancy footwork to do, and we've seen him doing it rather adeptly if the recent polls are to be believed. The mixed record, I think, comes on a number of fronts. When it comes to foreclosures, are we in the business of preventing them or facilitating them? Hard to tell. A lot of policies seem to say, hey, we got to clear this backlog of foreclosures. Others treat foreclosures as victims of big banks and secondary mortgage markets, and therefore we better protect them. We've had 2 or more headed policy on foreclosures. When it comes to the side of the policy that's addressed towards distressed homeowners, some homeowners have been helped. Some folks who wished to keep their homes and saw a way to do so, given their job and other realities, are still in their homes today. But many, when they tried to navigate the world of housing counseling and non-responsive bank officers and servicers, et cetera, have just gotten more frustrated and more motivated to walk away, as a matter of fact. We've seen the homeless prevention and rapid rehousing monies fielded, I think, smoothly, streamlined. A lot of money got into a lot of very constructive hands quickly, and it made a lot of differences. That money was spent, at least in our jurisdiction, I think quite fluidly, if you will. And I think that a bunch of people did benefit. There was kind of a donut hole in that field where if folks were a little too well off, they didn't qualify, and if they were in the standard categories of disadvantage that we already know about in our communities, they didn't qualify either. Neighborhood stabilization remains a topic of interest of ours. I think the jury is not in yet as far as how it did what it was supposed to do, but I will tell you that's an extremely hard study to design because in a premeditated fashion, the administration designed the criteria for NSP in a very flexible way, and it's hard to know what that money did in any consistent category where we can compare apples and apples. It's all got NSP attached to it, but so many jurisdictions did so many different creative, interesting, useful things, and some less so. Well, the arguments about HUD's budget continue, and the tendency of this administration to do its part in shortchanging HUD and its programs in ways that trickle down to tightened budgets for all of us in this room, except me, have been well known. And in the recent go-around on the fiscal year 13 proposal, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities had a lot to say about how folks would make do under these numbers, as if this was an opponent in the White House instead of a friend. I would also like to say just a little bit about regions and cities. It isn't just housing. My center at UC Berkeley is the Berkeley Program on Housing and Urban Policy. And it was very refreshing when the president took office. There were murmurs of genuine federal leadership. Some of the language that you find in the urban cities, the urban affairs area of the White House's website. Strong cities are building blocks to strong regions. Interdisciplinary approaches, appreciating interdependent nature of issues affecting urban communities. This sounds right out of our regionalist book, right? We want the federal government to be thinking this way. Taking into account how cities, suburbs, and exurbs interact. This sounds almost revolutionary. Revitalize urban areas holistically. And this is the kind of talk that drives Sarah Palin just crazy because she senses, and a lot of folks who are on the right and even in the middle of the political distribution think that it's all talk. Where's the action? And I wonder whether you can identify in your own practice in the last 4 years ways in which, thanks to federal leadership, you've been treating urban areas more holistically. And fragmentation and standard battles over tax base have been somehow eased. Who knows? I think it depends on where we've been and what kind of leadership there's been on our local level. I think we have been in an era of an age of HUD innovation. The rental alignment conferences really mean business when it comes to streamlining flows of rental assistance, and Lord knows we have a lot of work to do to make federal programs on the rental assistance side work better and work more efficiently. The rental assistance demonstration is kind of taking another crack at the Hope 6 plan to try to revitalize public housing, this time using project-based vouchers, and there's a lot of promise there. And I think HUD is spending its money wisely. FHA is kind of dipping its magic wand into the low-income housing tax credit and imagining deals where it would make up for some of the gap finance that's now missing thanks to the downturn. The sustainable communities and energy efficiency programs, I think, too, have been very innovative, very thoughtful, taking prescriptions based upon a lot of pioneering that's been done in the past, and bode well, if only they can be funded. I would also say that the stimulus package's attention to the problem of LIHTC projects that were in the pipeline and putting money towards those sunk investments and saving them with the so-called LIHTC exchanges was really wise. And it saved some of the production pipeline that otherwise would have led to the cancellation of projects. Well, let's turn to the other side. Romney plus Ryan equals what? This is the new math. And I guess it's time for some bold predictions, and the only risk is that I'm totally wrong, which I can tell you never happens. If there's a landslide, if there's absolute control of Congress and the White House, I think it's likely that then President Romney to come will need to follow the playbook of the Tea Party Congress and Congressman Ryan and that there will be a round of draconian, voracious cuts-only deficit reduction like we've never seen before. I don't think that there's any doubt about that. They will act, and they will act quickly. And it will be to the benefit and following the desires of their voters. I think we'll see across-the-board slashes in housing choice vouchers. That's both Section 8 and project-based vouchers. I think your CDBG budgets will shrink markedly. I think the flows of funds to seniors and the homeless and other special needs communities will fall drastically. And I think we'll also see a quick terminus to all of the innovation that HUD's been busy with in the last 4 years. If it's unproven, if you don't have outcomes, then we can't afford you. We have to cut this deficit, and bye-bye experimentation. If the GOP wins the White House, but it's a narrower victory, meaning control of one or fewer houses of Congress, I think we have a decidedly more nuanced picture of what will happen in terms of housing and urban policy. Up until very recently, we've received very little signal from the Romney-Ryan campaign until just in time for your speaker's presentation in Orlando, as if his prayers during the high holidays were answered. The Romney-Ryan campaign releases its white paper about 10 days ago, Securing the American Dream and the Future of Housing Policy. Thanks, guys. I have something to say in Orlando. I really appreciate it. I wanted to send them a gratuity, but I don't know who wrote it. I don't think it was either of them. In any event, let me go through what they have to say. They have 5 big ideas. Let's look at them one at a time. They say that we need to reform Fannie and Freddie. They say that we need to liquidate the U.S. REO foreclosure portfolio, which they characterize as being more than 200,000 units, vacant foreclosed properties, owned by you and me and all of our friends in the United States. They want to make foreclosure alternatives easier. Number 4, they want to replace Dodd-Frank, and that is the verb they use, replace. And finally, they think we need more jobs. And the jobs economy dovetails with their plan for housing. And as Professor Snaith indicated, it's not a contrived connection that they make. So let's look at these things one at a time. First, reform Fannie and Freddie. The question is how and when. The need to do so has been clear to all of us since the fall of 2007 or before. Those who were great prognosticators and saw the problems coming would have argued for some kind of reordering of the Fannie-Freddie playbook and the set of incentives that these quasi-public, quasi-private companies pursue was already in order. President Obama knew this. He's a smart guy. But for 4 years, this challenge has been one on which the White House has barely pushed the needle. The policy intricacies to addressing the problem, I think, they approach the level of healthcare reform or Dodd-Frank. The moderate proposal out there is first to try to decouple the investment and market stabilization elements of these GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises. There are ready analogs from abroad if you want to go to a wiki near you and look up covered bonds. There is a way in which you can sequester, and I don't know that's a scary and dirty word, but you can sequester the risk in such a way as to undo the untoward incentives that we saw got us into such trouble over the last decade or so. The moderate proposal for Fannie Freddie continues. The idea is to privatize the riskiest elements of the proposals and the portfolios, and the problem with that is to diagnose those things. A lot of due diligence has been pressed towards the task, and a lot of uncertainty remains when you try to evaluate these portfolios. The other thing is to get them out of the affordability business a little bit. The moderates see some room for improvement in undoing some of the public side. They want to replace it, but in a deficit environment like we face and a sluggish recovery, they don't know how to finance it. So they take themselves seriously about the need to deal with these entities and undo the instability that their continuing uncertainty breeds for the rest of the housing economy. I think the argument is that they would want to retain some Community Reinvestment Act style, that means carrots rather than sticks, incentive system for sustainable communities investments. So we like it when we see it, and we want to reward it, but having all of that in one publicly held company is probably something we need to step away from because it leads to all sorts of mixed signals and inverse incentives that have gotten us into trouble. The tagline that Romney Ryan put on this first point of their platform is "End too big to fail," which is kind of metaphorical. Kind of sounds like a rap tune or something. I'm not sure I understand it. But the idea is that we can paint with a broad brush, and if we, the progressives on the GOP ticket, are your friends against the big banks, and your friends against big insurance, and your friends against big government, then we're going to undo the bigness that is Fannie Freddie. But let's face it, there are a lot of folks in the center of the political spectrum who don't like what happened with Fannie Freddie and know something went terribly wrong from a management perspective. On this first point, the details remain lacking, and the devil lies right there. The next item is to responsibly liquidate 200,000 plus vacant foreclosed homes now owned by the government. Sounds like a good idea, and we've already been trying to pursue it. So I think that the Dems presumably agree with this idea. The government is a bad landlord. Consider public housing's fate. The notion that we would back ourselves into a larger involvement from an ownership standpoint, that means owning, managing, renting, maintaining, upgrading. All of those functions that landlords in the private market undertake are now on the ledger of the federal government. That this is not a sustainable plan for the future. We already see springing up, and I hope you have seen in your jurisdictions, foreclosure investment firms that aren't afraid to buy these properties at lower prices and operate them, rehab them, wait for prices to improve, and make money in the meantime. There's been some leadership in the private sector, and we need to take advantage of it. The caveat, I think, is present in the stories of what happens when public housing goes private too quickly, such as in Asia, where they offloaded their entire public housing inventories all at once, and it caused desperately bad signals to be sent in the marketplace. Sudden high vacancies, sudden low prices, to the point that landlords suffered greatly, and you had a lot of bad ripple effects in the economy. We have to do this carefully, and we have to rely on, I think, city and county leadership to figure out how much, where, and when. The third point, 3 out of 5, making progress, is to make foreclosure alternatives easier. The question is whether the Republicans mean to benefit banks and buyers, or current owners, or both. They will face the same moral hazard problems that have really hampered the Obama administration's efforts to try to give aid to homeowners. How much is too much, and how much do you end up rewarding irresponsibility or advantage seeking as opposed to outright hardship that you wish to support? They list specifically short sales, deeds in lieu of foreclosure, shared appreciation vehicles, which are all out there. My concern is that a lot of this very much depends on local law, and a lot of this really depends upon the tax implications. I don't know if you know anyone who has suddenly realized long after their short sale closed that they had to register the saved mortgage payments as income. This is big news to them, and we should really think about it carefully when we're continuing our efforts to intervene wisely and firmly in these markets. The other thing is that if you suddenly signal to the banks that it's time for a foreclosure bonanza to really clear these backlogs, independent voters may be turned off by what they already experienced as kind of the robo-signing, quick processing, not very sensitive ways in which banks treated foreclosures and, to many, the victims of foreclosures. Number 4, replace Dodd-Frank to get mortgage credit flowing again. I think Professor Snaith knows Dodd-Frank much more intricately than I do. But my question is whether Dodd-Frank is truly to blame for the credit crunch. Weren't the seeds planted a long time ago? I'm not qualified to make that judgment, and neither is the median voter. But I think that if we're in the mode of an election that says to re-regulate or deregulate, then their argument about Dodd-Frank and the mountains of paperwork necessary to process secondary mortgage transactions, for example, it has a lot of consumer protection in it, but not without cost to industry. And the more they can make that case, the more they can add evidence to the argument that government is in your way. I think that the expansion in the home lending sector isn't going to happen until interest rates actually increase and make housing investment more appealing relative to other investment. But that's an economic recovery story. I'm befuddled as to how the equity markets would be so solid, so fully recovered. We know a lot of wealth has been transferred out of home equity into the stock market. And however, that market leadership of the stock market has not translated into stabilization in home equity and lending. And I don't think anybody really knows why. I think it's a real puzzle. Well, I also have the heightened lending standards implementing fiduciary suitability thresholds. These are a good thing. Consumer protection is necessary. We know that a lot of people got into overly burdensome mortgages they had no business in. And were there a little bit of sound planning and suitability practice in the industry, including in the ratings agencies, we might not have been in trouble so deep. All of Dodd-Frank implementation is still very much underway. I think it's an open question whether Romney can rally the troops and win on a financial deregulation platform. Some folks think he has a strong point, but this is a dividing point between the campaigns. This is part of what I think President Obama means when he says, let's not go backwards, meaning don't remember how the banks failed you. We need to still stick it to them. Was I almost going into a President Obama impersonation? I think Saturday Night Live is rubbing off on me. Well, details are lacking there. I want to close because I'm just near the end of my time, but on this last point, many unemployed Obama-Biden 08 voters may very much wish to give the Romney-Ryan team a chance to do better. And the White House knows that this is a true Achilles heel for the campaign. The White House knows that there are a lot of folks who have hardship and will vote that hardship in the ballot box. The question is whether Romney can turn heads back towards those kind of indices that people are most responsive to, which is, I have concrete plans to get your job back. How's he going to do that? Can he sell it? What does it have to do with housing? Everything. And I don't have to explain that to the people in this room. Well, some final points on what I think may be the coming convergence or consensus in the housing policy world to come as the political pendulum swings back and forth over the years in the future of our careers. What are we likely to see? Where is the central point if, in fact, we depolarize some of this? And we arrive at some of the best practices, some of the good ideas. I think that if there's anything Democrats and Republicans can agree upon, it's that excessive regulation of land supply is a bad thing. And in fact, it was President Bush's father who nominated Governor Kane to a panel, a blue ribbon commission on this in the early 90s, which led to all sorts of deregulatory local land use, deregulatory leadership by the federal government. The Regulatory Barriers Clearinghouse, the National Land Use Regulatory Database that was pushed forward for several years during the Bush administration. This is something on which I think developers, lenders, and governments can agree. The question is how to undo excessive land use restrictions. A lot of us are talking about reforming the mortgage interest deduction and balancing the Internal Revenue Code so that folks will be equally benefited between home ownership and rentership. In addition, that folks who are buying second homes or buying million-dollar homes may be less in need of mortgage interest relief on their tax returns than others. So adding a renter's tax credit to the tax return is also something that's being talked about more and more vociferously in Washington. Let's keep track of it. I think we now have to re-examine some of the multifamily disinvestment policies that led to the Tax Reform Act of '86. I don't want to reinstall all of the problems of the tax shelters. However, I think we may need more than LIHTC. LIHTC has worked great, but to get out of the mess we're in, we may need more. I think the chronic homelessness focus will remain, and it will be the way in which local governments will tailor their programs. I think it's something on which the interagency task force agrees now. The word is chronic. I think the notion of some gentle or even firmer welfare reform style interventions in housing policy, such as through family self-sufficiency, if not outright time limits on housing choice vouchers, may be something on which moderates will begin to agree. I can't believe the number of long-term progressive Congress people who are now willing to talk about conditioned housing assistance, undoing the tight entitlement that a number of families have enjoyed. Depending upon supply, of course, the wait lists haven't shrunk. I think we need to expand project-based vouchers. I think they work, and they may work better than other supply programs. And I think that we need to induce more landlords to come into the market, and we need to streamline the habitability inspections that HUD has been doing in the private market all these years. We know that location matters. The more portable these vouchers are, the better. Well, in conclusion, what if housing and urban policy actually influenced the 2012 outcome? We might be able to write that history about this election, and it excites me. Because for the first 20 years of my studying this field, there was no chance it would ever end up on the political stage. And here, I think we're in an election where things may seriously matter. Remember our star power. So, consider what our fellow rational common sense voters are now asking themselves. Are foreclosures really avoidable? Should government intervene? Can that intervention ever succeed? Good question in the ballot box. What part of our ongoing economic struggles are the president's fault? Is it George W. Bush's fault? Is it nobody's fault? Everybody's fault? This is one of the things I'm going to be thinking in the ballot box. They're going to have to give me a lot of time in there. If you believe government can heal the housing economy, does Governor Romney deserve a chance to lead that effort, given how slow the progress has been under President Obama? The Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street agree on at least one thing. Government, as usual, helped get us into this mess and may never be able to get us out. So that's the real question. Are all of your file cards or web documents or folders that represent all of the streams of existing policies, what if all those tools are unfit? What if we really need to reinvent the policy toolkit given what we've learned after the Great Recession? Those are my thoughts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosenthal. I think I heard both speakers reference Nevada. They may not have been plugs, but, but being from Clark County, Las Vegas, we'll take any type of attention we can get. Let's give another round of applause for all three of these gentlemen. It was a pleasure to have all three of these gentlemen on board today, and we're very grateful for their services to us today. Thank you very much.